Gears Tactics is a game I've been wanting to play for years now, but just never felt ready. I like the Gears of War series, love it when IPs get used for non-traditional stuff, and I was getting pretty into the tactics genre. Since 2021, I'd been wanting to play and do a video on this game, but since I hadn't experienced XCOM, it didn't feel right. Well, now I have, and finally got the Monkey of Midnight Suns off my back too, so I'm now fully geared to go. After all this time, it's a relief to finally check this one off my backlog, but I can't say my expectations were fully met. Initially they were. Act 1 up until the Brumach fight was pretty great, but then Act 2 happened, then Act 3, and dear god, I'm so fucking tired of this game. There's a few core problems with Gears Tactics, and a dozen or so minor ones that get more and more grating as time goes on. If I didn't commit to doing a video on this game, I probably would have stopped halfway through, and if not there, I unquestionably would have given up in Act 3, for fuck's sake. There's really only two types of people I would recommend this game to. One, those who are passionately in love with the tactics genre and crave any and all content in this style. After all, it does have some unique things to it. And two, people who are into Gears of War and could possibly use this as an entry point into the genre, and then likely put it down after Act 2 is done. Everybody else? Nah, not worth the money or time spent. What interested me immediately, besides my obvious interest in the tactics genre, was the capitalization of the Gears of War IP. Quite literally, there's no better franchise to throw into the XCOM-like tactics subgenre than this. It's the perfect marriage. Gears of War was one of the first to truly nail down the cover-based shooting system way back in 2006. Tap A and you'll slide into the nearest pile of sandbags, or put your back against a wall, and so on. The stickiness, the ease of access to, and simple exit from, made the cover in Gears of War stand the test of time. It's just as easy as it is now as it was back then. They set the bar so high that this cover system is synonymous with Gears of War itself. The two will undoubtedly share a history together. This is why jamming this setting into a turn-based tactics-shaped hole, in XCOM-like, where you'll regularly place your units in and out of cover, is sublime, harmonious. Sadly though, that idyllic matching did a lot of the heavy lifting when it came to trying to enjoy the game for the full runtime. We're not there yet though. Let's take a quick pit stop to discuss the audio and visual side of things. The graphics and sound design are superb, but it's not exactly impressive. They used the actual Gears of War games as a foundation, then pulled the camera up, and while it is simple, seemingly, it accomplished the very thing they were going for. This feels like it belongs in the Gears of War series. The visuals are extremely detailed and have that Gears flavor, and some of the weather effects and lighting make a few of the environments look downright gorgeous. The blue computery menus and UI aren't my cup of tea at all, but it does fit with the series, so what can you do? The sound design is as good as anyone could hope for, but again, it's not especially praiseworthy since you know it's just the Gears of War audio verbatim. Perhaps there wasn't a ton of work or creativity involved, but it would be incredibly silly to hold that against the game. It hits the nail on the head in every way possible. A headshot sounds like a headshot. Slamming into cover produces the comforting thump of safety. And defeating the last enemy on the battle space elicits the classic guitar of victory.
And stay down.
This feels like an extension of the mainline series. The weapons, enemies, sound effects, and visuals, it's all there, but it's not enough. The flaws of Gears Tactics are seemingly never-ending and will dominate this video, so I think it's important to first shout out some of the unique positives the game has. First off, you can move the camera around freely. It might be easier to frame and block the action, maybe, for XCOM and other tactics games, but I've never liked the tight diagonal 4 angles restriction. Slight movements to see important details is a thankful consideration. In Gears Tactics, there's less so a grid on the floor, and instead, the lines to move your units are a bit more freeform. The dots on the ground are a great way to indicate the end of one action and the start of another. It's surprisingly easy to read, and it doesn't lead to as much confusion as I thought it would initially. You get 3 actions per turn for each character, which can be spent on skills, movement, reloading, attacking, and so on. That is a lot of freedom, and it opens up some interesting styles of play. The Overwatch mechanic in this tactics game is a bit different than what's featured in others. You get a cone of vision to work with, and your remaining actions determine how many times you can fire on Overwatch. Using Overwatch with all 3 action points remaining means you'll be able to fire 3 separate times in that cone of vision, permitting that you have enough ammo left anyway. Even better, being able to extend or retract the length of the cone has strategic benefits. Sometimes you don't want two teammates shooting at the same enemy, or you want to make sure someone runs into a proximity mine, so you'll place your vision so it ends before the grenade radius. The sniper rifle having a very narrow but long cone, and shotgun getting a wide but short one, is another layer of difference to aid strategic thinking. Something else cool is how obstructions work. In some other tactics games, the only factors at play for a ranged gunshot are the percentage numbers and the enemy in question. If you shoot through a wall or something, or even an ally or different enemy, it's like they weren't even there. Well, in Gears Tactics, you'll have to take into consideration who's nearby. If you miss a shot and your friendly is right there, well, you might hit them instead. In fact, this happened more often than not, sadly. Even on Overwatch, you have to be careful. But you can use this to your advantage at times, like the very first moment I saw this obstruction feature in action. I killed one wretch, and my remaining bullets finished off the one behind him. Something that seems so simple when thinking in real-world logic, but I imagine it isn't so easy to implement, nor is it as expected when thinking in turn-based games in the first place. The battlefield feels closer and more intimate as a result. There's a disabling shot every unit is given by default that has them firing their snub pistol to interrupt enemy actions like Overwatch. A nice little trick to give players to use when they might need it, and it gets the snub pistol some action. A win-win. There's a lot of unique and interesting skills available depending on the class, and thankfully Gears Tactics doesn't pull a Bearded Ladies, the developers behind Mutant Year Zero and Miasma Chronicles. In those games, you have plenty of cool abilities to use, but you can only have 2 or so active at a time. How incredibly boring. I've made an hour-long video on Mutant Year Zero already, so I won't get in the weeds with all of that again, but in Gears Tactics, yes, you can have a crap load of abilities in battle at once, and they balanced it by giving them long cooldowns. Yep, that's the obvious thing to do, alright. Fucking Miasma Chronicles, man. Once you get some headway into Jack's tree, the robot helper guy, he starts to get seriously helpful, such as providing shields, damage protection, reloading everyone's guns, dropping weapons, and even removing the enemy's opportunity attack, allowing you to chainsaw or retro-lancer charge them when you couldn't before. Gotta love the fact that you can chainsaw and gore enemies in this game, that's a huge plus. Lastly, the execution mechanic is genius. I don't know the ins and outs of Gears of War multiplayer these days, but back in the day, execution was the go-to game mode. 4v4, and when you downed someone, you had to get close enough and execute them for the kill to count, opposed to Warzone where you could keep firing at a long distance to finish them off. Gears Tactics technically works in Warzone rules. You can shoot them from far away when they're crawling and they'll die, but if you perform the action called execution, every other teammate gets an additional action point. You can see how advantageous that would be in tight spots. In fact, during the final boss fight, I clutched out the victory this way. I had already spent all of my actions with the 2 squad mates close to the boss, and he was maybe a hit or 2 away from death. I had to get him this turn. I put all my eggs in this basket. I was probably going to fail the mission if it went even one more turn. However, on the other side, I noticed I had an enemy right next to me that was already damaged. I prayed I wouldn't insta-gib him, and even though I got a crit, he went down instead of die immediately. Yes! I executed him, then with the extra action points, I took the final shots I needed and killed the boss. This is legitimately the best thing in the game, and went a long way in separating Gears Tactics from others in the same genre. Now, with all that out of the way, it's time for a lot of negativity. The progression system in this game is bad. On paper, it might not look drastically different from others in the genre. Your squad gains experience for completing missions, and you receive some for kills with whichever unit did the deed. Does this mean the support classes will get less XP overall, given they're incentivized to use their actions for support instead of murder? Yes, and that is silly, but considering you won't reach the max level for any of the classes by the end of a playthrough, that isn't the main factor of why the progression feels so bad. You get 2 skill points each level up, and initially that feels great. Your skill tree gets a jump start, essentially. Picking 2 skills at once, oh baby! But after the honeymoon period, you'll realize that waiting longer to gain 2 skill points isn't a good feeling. Even though there are far fewer enemies to kill in the beginning act, along with far fewer missions, you gain levels 4 times as fast here as you will in the other acts. To put it in perspective, I finished Act 1 at level 4 with Gabe, and level 5 with Sid. I finished the game, again, I finished Act 3, At level 6 with Gabe and level 7 with Sid. 4 level ups in 1 act compared to 2 across 2 acts. That might already sound nuts, but that doesn't even do it justice. 8 missions in Act 1 compared to 34 combined in Acts 2 and 3. What the fuck, man? It's as if Splash Damage was trying to front-load the fun part of the character progression to make the people who got a taste of it on Game Pass or something think it's a well-paced experience. It's not, though. Not at all. I still have issues with the individual intricacies of the experience system, so let's dig further. Although it seems that other games also do the every enemy gives a set experience gain thing, in Gears Tactics, everything granting 50 XP feels a bit ridiculous, as Retchers and Tickers are so much easier to kill than Boomers and Cantuses, especially when factoring in grenades. We'll get to the grenades later, don't you worry. The killing blow is all that counts too, so all the work put in beforehand to whittle down a tough foe means jack shit for everyone who didn't get the last hit. Wow, Splash Damage brought back kill stealing from the very first Gears of War game. Nice job, guys. Fuck's sake, even Gears of War 2 allowed for partial experience gain, goddamn. 50 XP here and there might not sound like a huge shift, but the game throws a metric shit ton of enemies at you each mission, many of them being low health goobers. It's all too easy for a scout or sniper class to dominate so thoroughly that the others simply have to get by on the mission completed experience alone. Maybe this was another reason for the down states, along with the chainsaw and retro lancer gore, to let the vanguard and support units get some easy experience with executions? Not sure. At one point that might not have been a thing though, as I came across this Reddit post about the XP system, and it's what most people refer to when anyone asks about it online. There it says executions don't grant XP, but when doing testing on my own, they definitely did, so maybe a patch fixed that issue at one point? I don't know. By the way, the only way to properly see this yourself is to check the barracks numbers between missions. Mid-battle, you don't get shown how much XP you're getting, and the progress bar post-mission doesn't move or show how much you gained at all. It's as if Splash Damage was trying to hide the fact that after Act 1, you rarely level up anymore. Why they were protecting Act 1 as much as they did, I have no idea, but it's pretty clear. Because you might be chasing any and all avenues to level up your units, given that it's one of the only things you can do to shape your playthrough, once you know about the details of the progression system, you'll be funneled into a specific style of play, and this hurts E-holes especially. Emergence holes, or E-holes for short, are a fun carryover from the Gears of War games, and lobbing a grenade into them to prevent more enemies from spawning is a decent little wrinkle to add to the mix. You can even plant a grenade onto the incoming crater spot one turn early, and it'll take care of it without any enemies being let loose. Awesome, right? No, that's incredibly inefficient, actually. Closing E-holes doesn't grant XP, as far as I know, and you prevented 3 waves of enemies to kill, so you missed out on all of that experience, too. Great. Because you can simply recruit better and better soldiers as the game progresses, which will naturally outpace the random procedurally generated cogs you had already, it's best to completely neglect the non-main characters, and prioritizing landing the killing blow with Gabe if possible. After all, he, along with Sid, Michaela, and Reyna, are mandatory. In many story missions, you're only given 1 free slot to pick somebody else, and near the end, all 4 of them are required, taking up all 4 spots. Oh, you tried to build up a scout class of your own? How cute, but sorry, idiot, Reyna needs to be in the final cutscene, so you can't use the one you put effort and time into. Since there are 5 classes, and only 4 squad slots, and there are 4 mandatory characters at the end, the heavy unit, which boasts their share of powerful skills, gets forcibly placed on the bench. Why pretend this is a game where you can pick your squad and fight how you want when you can't? It's not even for any benefit. The main characters don't have anything interesting to say or do in cutscenes anyway. Michaela is just a random sniper who knew where Ukon was once, and admittedly did hit a guy with a shovel, which was pretty funny. And Reyna shows up right at the end to replace the scout you actually cared about. It's funny how off the mark Splash Damage was with the XCOM expendable soldiers idea. While you can customize and name your squad in Gears Tactics, I'd be incredibly surprised if Gears players felt as attached to their soldiers as XCOM players. How could you be? Gabe, Sid, and Michaela are the ones we're actually supposed to care about, whereas in XCOM, these little doofuses were the main characters. Not only could you bring them into each and every combat encounter, losing one in battle was a huge deal. The fresh recruits were significantly worse than your leveled up unit, so you were losing ground in the long game as well as the short game. This has obvious negative ramifications that affect many future decisions, but in Gears Tactics, besides the current fight you're in, losing a random cog means nothing. In fact, before the jacked edition of the game forced the robot to tag along during each and every mission, players would opt to kill their recruits on purpose. They'd intentionally whiff a grenade throw so they could skip another rerun of the same exact side mission they played a dozen times. I'm not saying every tactics game needs to follow in the footsteps of XCOM, not even close. In all honesty, I could easily see myself liking Mutant Year Zero or Gears Tactics more if they didn't fumble the ball in so many small but still significant ways. I don't need Gears Tactics to have as much out-of-game depth as XCOM did with its base management, but I need fucking something. When you aren't in a cutscene or a mission, this screen is all you get. Open up loot chests, recruit some nobodies, unequip and equip gear, 1,000 times it felt like, and sometimes choose new skills for a character. That's it. The pacing of the game already feels atrocious due to the abundance of side missions in Act 2 and 3, but even if those weren't a thing, there's not enough to space out the battles. This is the opposite problem Midnight Suns had, if you saw it as a problem anyway. Combat mainlined into you, but when all of it feels the same, it goes from a positive to a negative really quickly. After Act 1, the missions start to repeat, the maps start to repeat, the few additional enemies don't do enough to spice up the gameplay, and you aren't progressing and learning new skills as much anymore because the progression system is fried. Because there's nothing to do in between missions, you're forced to come to grips with how monotonous this game really is. While the quantity of unique skills are a welcome sight, with the progression being the way that it is, you'll never feel like you've reached the peak of the build you were working towards. You'll likely land around level 6 or 7 at most in one playthrough, and that's not even enough to cover half of the tree. At best, you'll have one branch all the way done, and maybe some here and there in the others. In its defense, the game does throw skill resets at you like they're going out of style, so Splash definitely wanted players to experiment, but if you've seen my Gunhouse video, you might know already, I'm really not a fan of min-maxing and resetting skills left and right. I do love the passive effects and the improvements to some skills though. Upping the effectiveness of your favorite ability slowly throughout the campaign is something I could easily jump on board with. If Mutant Year Zero had that, more powers active at a time, the cone overwatch system, and better equipment managing, holy crap, that would be the best thing ever. Anyway, without any out-of-depth game to be seen, outside of choosing which attachments to go with and which skills to try, both losing their luster during Act 2, the game starts to feel stagnant. With every new mission, you're essentially only working towards another story cutscene and, gosh, maybe a couple of skill points now and then? There's no sense of forward momentum, especially when new enemies stop being introduced, the maps start to look alike, and you're forced to do the same side missions over and over with barely anything to show for it besides a box checked off. There's simply nothing to look forward to, and that's a huge buzzkill for this type of game. I would say I feel bad for people who played at launch, since they wouldn't even have Jack or the Deviant versions of enemies to add to the mix. The Jacked update came out 6 months after release and added those elements in, so those early players didn't get as much variety once that third act hit. However, at least they were able to skip the side missions. The side missions are a pathetically transparent attempt to pad the game out. Sadly, if you had only played Act 1 and stopped, you're essentially experiencing the best of what the game has to offer. Maybe you could make the case that the added enemies and addition of Torque Bow and Boomshot make Act 2 worth the trouble, but Act 3? It has a fine boss fight, but I sincerely don't think it's worth the additional 10 hours of slog to get to. It has one new enemy type, the Zealot, who I didn't even remember was a thing until I checked my footage, which makes sense since it's just a beefy Cantus, I suppose. And besides him, if you want to count it, sure, the Deviant Disciple, who cares? There are no new classes at this point, your weapons are the same as always, and there aren't any additional enemies that carry something fun like the Boomshot or Torque Bow, so nothing on that front either. There aren't any new objectives, and after Chapter 2, there's barely even any cutscenes anymore. Why would there be? All we're doing is taking part in the same missions we've done a dozen times now, but this time the flavor text says something different. During Act 3, you won't be leveling up as much either, so even though there are more missions, you're advancing your characters less and less. Each act ramps up its side mission force feeds, but the third act doubles down on the already tripled down of Act 2. There were two side missions you had to do in Act 1. The first one was novel even, as it was the first time you saw the control game mode. The second time a side mission pops up, you have the choice of 2, and you only have to play 1. Once Act 2 starts, the game interrupts you 3 times instead of 2, and makes you choose 2 side missions instead of 1. First act had 2, now second act has 6. Holy cow, what an increase. Well, the third act has 12. It interrupts your story progression 4 times, and makes you do 3 side missions in a row before continuing with the story. 3 side missions for every 2 story missions. There are only 5 objective types in the game: control, rescue, reach gate, then eliminate enemies 1, outrun nemesis blasts, and sabotage, which is basically the same as incursion, honestly. Get to a spot, eliminate all enemies. 5 objective types, 1 or 2 map layouts each mode, and a grand total of 20 side missions that are required to finish the game. Look online anywhere and you'll see the outpouring of hate these side missions received, and yeah, I'm right there with you. This bloats the game to an obscene and unnecessary length, even ignoring the fact that side mission implies optional, which these quite clearly are not. The flavor text on them even feels insulting after a while too. Ukon, the big bad guy, is attempting to cut the convoy off from essential resources. The grubs have invaded the site containing a key asset. Bring back the equipment. You want to know what we grabbed? Nothing, unless you count the main objective reward, which is an epic precision stock, which lowers damage by 40. Oh boy! This side mission was directly before us going in and killing the final boss of the game, and right after we did way too many story missions getting everything ready for that combat encounter, by the way. Everything in a game is fake to some extent, but this text is fake to the second power. This is Super Saiyan 2 levels of fake. If that wasn't enough, the modifiers on the side missions make them even more of a pain at times. Perhaps this was their one attempt at injecting variety into the game, but it's a complete failure. I already don't want to do these levels, so forcing me to tough it out with only half my squad, or no grenades, or without Overwatch doesn't get me excited at all. Sometimes they aren't even worded in a way that makes sense. Your units recover 2 actions per turn apparently translates to you only get 2 actions instead of 3 per turn. Yeah, that'll go great with a scavenger run objective. Outrunning the blasts with 1 fewer action sounds awesome. Nah, no thanks. I genuinely do think these would be an okay addition if they were always available and always optional. Sort of a, you want more XP for a story mission? You'll have to earn it sort of thing. Fix the experience gain nonsense, double how fast you gain levels, and only grant 1 skill point each level up. Then you'd have a decent sense of progression and reason to do the side missions, if they were optional. Too bad. Instead, they wanted to consistently halt your momentum, what little of it you had, to force these onto you, which kills any and all enthusiasm to continue on with the game. If I weren't making a video on this, like I said, I would have definitely stopped playing in Act 3. Gears Tactics has maybe 12 hours of quality gameplay, stretched to a preposterous 30 hours. I wouldn't be surprised to hear if there was some behind-the-scenes meddling going on. The purpose of Gears Tactics was to be another avenue to get people into the series, and going off a few interviews, this was meant to be treated as another entry in the Gears franchise. Shorter games simply aren't respected as much as longer ones, and if this seemingly AAA budget game only went on for 12 hours, well, I doubt executives who make decisions and not games would be as happy. Instead of giving them more time or freedom to put more into the game, Splash Damage might have had to stretch it out any way they could, like tossing a few more required side missions in. See, I'd love to think that's the case, but considering the version I played, the Jacked Edition, came out after the game launched and only serves to double down on the side missions due to forcing Jack on you and demanding you keep him alive as one of the objectives, maybe this is all on Splash Damage. I found a podcast where one of the game designers was being interviewed, and they mentioned that it's difficult to nail the sweet spot of game length and how much content is there and so on, and even mentioned side missions.
It's hard to, when you're doing this and you're balancing the game, it's hard to nail like the perfect spot where you don't overdo,
gotcha,
like with the content, with the side missions, and you still keep the or you have a game that is too short, for example.
Okay.
This interview took place a couple months after the PC release, and only a few months later, Jacked Edition came out. And instead of listening to the reviewers at the time, they raised their middle finger and made it so you couldn't feed your nobody characters frags to get the side missions over quicker. The option to play the regular story mode without Jack is still there, but if you want the newer enemies and Jack as a whole, Sorry bro, you're no longer allowed to clunkily bypass this blatant padding. As much fun as Jack can be, if this is the trade-off, I'm not sure he's worth it. Plus, with those 5 extra months of time, besides Jack, splash damage only managed to add in a handful of enemies, which are slightly beefier copies of ones we've seen before, so I'm not about to lament over the Gears tactics that never was. As much as I've been trashing the side missions, in all honesty, the story missions aren't that much better once you hit Act 2. This is another reason why Act 1 is so strong. Basically, every level has some sort of narrative significance, or at least has a unique environment to make it feel like you're making progress with something. Act 2, it immediately plummets and starts throwing in future 2B side missions as main story missions, and they don't have any stakes at all. As far as I'm concerned, rescuing cogs should not be a story mission unless the soldier we're saving is important in some way. It's so tiring to forcibly go in and rescue gears that I'll likely never use or care about. I'd rather just let them die and move on, to be honest. As far as the enemies go, it was nice to see some old favorites. Boomer, Theron Guard, Grenadier, Wretch, Sniper, and Hammerburst Guy. Before we get into those, though, I'd like to say definitively, tickers can be erased from existence. Oh great, you brought back the worst enemy from Gears of War 2 and made them seemingly even more annoying. They're almost fun additions, given that you can kick them and set up some combo explosions. I place a proximity mine near these 2 enemies, launch a ticker over there, and everyone gets taken down. There's an achievement for kicking one into an E-hole to close it off, so that's also a possibility. Kinda neat. Their gimmick, though, is what turns them into a pest. Firing at them and missing means they inch closer to you on your turn, and can even explode if they get close enough. They have a naturally high evasion number, and the only way to get that down is to use the kick action. If you don't have a good angle to make that ticker kick work for your benefit, sucking up an action just to assure you'll actually hit this danged thing is a cruel, sick joke, especially since that still doesn't guarantee they'll get hit. I mean, really? 69% chance to hit? It's like they're begging to be grenade sponges. The Theron Guards and Boomers have their appropriate weapons, and once you kill them, you can spend an action to grab their dropped torque bow or boomshot. This was the only way to use these before the Jacked edition. You can eventually upgrade Jack and drop down these guns mid-battle, but sadly those variants only have a single shot, opposed to the enemy ones which have more ammo. The torque bow is one of my favorite weapons in all of gaming, but here, it's not the same. It might seem insignificant, but the delay on the explosion in the mainline games was part of the charm. You don't just blow up, it goes straight to your thighs, and then you blow up.
My thighs?
And then you blow up.
Wait, sorry, no. The arrow sticks in, an unnerving second goes by, and then you blow up.
Drone eliminated!
With that gone, it just feels like another boom shot. The low power, high power difference impacts that too. High power is how I've always seen it used in the main games, but since that usually only has a 70% chance of hitting, the low power arc is usually the much better choice, and that's a bit sad. A slightly different looking grenade launcher, essentially. Bouncing and ricocheting the arrow off the terrain isn't as interesting or satisfying as the developers were likely hoping for either. The Boomers and Theron Guards are tough, since they take advantage of the fog of war more than others. They seem to know where you are even though you can't see them, and with a normal enemy, that might mean they come into view, miss a shot, go into Overwatch, whatever. But with Theron Guards, they waltz in, and immediately fire an arrow at you, dealing a crazy amount of damage. Neat. At least they can be chainsawed or gored with a Retro Lancer, I suppose, and they have relatively normal amounts of health. Boomers have more hit points and can't be immediately executed with insta-kill skills, and that definitely makes them properly imposing, but they can also saunter into view and do the same thing as the Theron Guards, and even worse, they can spawn out of E-holes and attack you that same turn. I did the best I could possibly do. He got hit by the Corpser's attack and stepped on a proximity mine, but even still, he boomed my 2 guys, and then Gabe had this to say.
Gotta spread out. Can't give the Boomer an easy target.
Gee Gabe, I had no idea. It's almost like we're in a mission where we can't spread out, and the game just cheated by letting a Boomer spawn and attack me immediately. Ugh. Thankfully the noises the Boomers make, both when they're off-screen walking around and when firing their shots, are practically worth their inclusion alone. Snipers can pin you down into a spot, Grenadiers can leap over and push your units out of cover, and Disciples are just Hammerburst bros with more health, a Toxic Cloud, and some other tricks. Cantus is the support unit, and he, along with a few others, have opportunity attacks, making it so you physically can't chainsaw or gore them. Besides the deviant versions of enemies, which, come on now, what the fuck is that name choice? That's it. The deviants being near carbon copies of their base class makes the battlefield a lot more confusing, and the Disciples look awfully similar too. You practically have to hover over enemies and see their health bar and name to know what you're dealing with. It would have been a lot more interesting if they had drastically different designs, but maybe Splash Damage didn't want to get too creative, given where this takes place in the Gears of War canon. This is one of the times where a pre-existing IP hurts the experience. I'm playing Gears 5 right now, and holy moly are there a whole host of interesting designs in here. A real shame none of these could make their way in. But not even the Berserker? Because your main weapons are static among the classes, Support gets Lancer, Vanguard gets Retro Lancer, Scout gets Nasher Shotgun, Sniper gets Longshot, and Heavy gets Mulcher, the power weapons of Torque Bow and Boomshot are the only samples of something different. You'd think, given the ticker inclusion, that Flamers would be an easy choice. Another unique enemy and another weapon to pick up. Sadly, no. There are no Grinders, no Butchers, no Lambent anything, no Krill, no Cyclops, no Beast Rider or Bloodmount, and that's only looking at Gears of War 2. Part of the fun of throwing licenses into a different genre is seeing the familiar characters and foes transition into the new environment, how they were adapted to the different rule set, and what their moves and gimmicks are. Tickers made the cut, and while all my complaints about them are still valid, it's nice to see Splash try something interesting with them. For the majority of the game, though, it felt like you're exclusively fighting off waves of Hammerburst Dinguses and Wretch and Ticker hordes. Some more distinct varieties would have really helped Gears Tactics stay engaging past Act 2. I'd imagine they tried to compensate for the lack of enemies and weapon choices by throwing in a bunch of skills, buffs, and nerfs, and to an extent I'm on board. I like having more options and seeing different attacks in combat, but superficial or not, assigning those skills to a different looking enemy or weapon type would have felt a bit better. Plus, everyone loves a flamethrower.
Yes, I love this thing!
The boss encounters are practically endurance battles, sometimes lasting an entire hour. Or maybe I'm just bad. The Brumok, Corpser, and Hydra all have 3 segmented sections of their health bars, and when they get damaged enough and drop to the next section, the game provides a checkpoint. Usually something else changes too, like reinforcements or attack patterns shifting slightly. There's a part of me that wishes these fights showed up more often to change up the pacing a bit, but if they did do a slightly altered rematch in the midpoint of Act 2 and 3, it might lose some of its charm. The only thing I don't fully understand is the mounted guns on the Hydra at the end. You can only damage the Brumok when its back is turned, which creates a satisfying tug-of-war, where you'll use one unit to deal damage and rotate the monster, and do the same thing on the other side to keep granting openings to knock some health off. If you can't line up a shot this way, since he's facing the squad mate you have actions with, well, you can still fire at his rocket cannons and gain some ground that way. Once those are destroyed, his offense is a bit more limited. That makes sense, but the Hydra also has the multiple targetable spots, but I just don't see why you'd ever waste a damage-dealing shot on the mounted rockets. To be fair, I didn't actually try that strategy, so maybe it is more helpful than I'm giving it credit, but I sincerely don't ever want to play this game again, so I don't want to go back and test it myself. Something exclusive to Gears Tactics is the lack of clarity when it's the opposing team's turn. I complimented Midnight Suns for having a predictable and clever order for the enemy's turn, and Gears Tactics is the polar opposite. Sometimes a swath of hostiles will all move at once, sometimes one will move on its own and stop, making you think it's done, only for it to still attack after a few other enemies made their moves. Watch this Grenadier walk over to me initially, shove my unit out of cover, and he's done, right? At least I thought so, as the other enemies start taking their turn. Oh wait, he shot me. After all that, he still had one of his actions left? Ah, good, my proximity mine interrupted this Grenadier's turn. Awesome, glad that worked. Oh, he still had an action left and shot me, I guess. Cool. The only reliable piece of information is if an enemy uses Overwatch, they're done for realsies. There's so much going on at once when the Locust make their moves, it's a chaotic mess, one that's not always easy to follow. This isn't a bug, by the way, this was a focus in development. One of the designers talked in depth about the simultaneous AI actions, and they seemed pretty proud of it. If two enemies are wanting to fire at one character, and both could be in frame of the same camera shot, the game will sync their actions up. The idea behind this was to create the illusion of a fast-paced battle like the Gears of War games. I can sort of respect the moxie of splash damage for trying this. It doesn't sound simple, but it's more trouble than it's worth.
We don't want to split the actions of a unit as much as possible. There's a point about cycles here. It's not always possible, but we try to keep them as close to each other as possible in the plan.
You sure about that? You sure about that? You sure about that?
The only part about this I like is enemy groups moving together if that's all they're doing initially, like wretches or something. That's a good visual and cuts down on some filler time. Everything else, not worth it. It just becomes a hassle. I'd argue it doesn't even work either. Whatever system they implemented doesn't account for the result of the action, so even though these two boomers are both in the same wide shot, one shoots and hits me, but the only way I'd ever know is by looking at the bottom right of the screen. What it chooses to stay with and what it chooses to move on from is very confusing. Every time a Theron guard does his taunt attack, it makes you sit through it, and then of course, when a boomer decides to take a stroll, it simply can't look away. But when enemies are going into Overwatch or shooting or anything else, it could easily zip on by without letting you register what just happened. I mean, just look at this nonsense. This camera problem extends to your turn too, especially on a soldier's final action point. I fire a sniper shot, I do land a hit, but the camera stays with my character and I have to move it over and see if I killed him or not. This happens so often, you might as well get in the habit of ignoring the visuals and focusing on that info log in the corner. At this point, I'm no longer playing a 3D computer game, but a pen and paper RPG. The visuals are supposed to elevate the experience, and the camera shifts spit in the face of that. If this was the result of them getting fancy with their AI programming and camera shots, it's a complete failure in my eyes. Like, if the purpose was to make things go quicker, you'd think there would at least be some work put in to have enemies on the same side of the level all go at once. What is this? It really needs to switch back and forth to a single enemy on each side of the screen? Why? Speaking of being a complete failure, their goal of the combat system is a flop too, as the whole reason for the 3 actions per character each turn was to make it a more offensive-focused and quick-paced strategy game. Instead, with their Overwatch mechanic being the way it is, it's actually far easier to utilize a choke point and wait for the enemy to come to you, holding your position, and watch them all trip over themselves to run into danger. Overwatch camping was a problem in XCOM 1, sure, but there you only shot once and could waste shots on the same single enemy. Here you have so much more control, and you can fire more than a single shot, so defensive play is a lot more encouraged than the developers likely intended on certain maps. See an obvious bottleneck like on a bridge? Just sit there and wait it out. You got time. Spawn in a boom shot and have fun while you're at it. It is worth noting I'm on the normal difficulty, whereas this might not be the case for hardcore or insane. The goal of a quicker-paced, offensive-oriented game is probably why Locust hordes get tossed down randomly throughout a mission, opposed to there being a lot of them statically positioned on the map. I know in XCOM reinforcements would happen at times, but for the most part, you had to move through a level and maybe approach a group of patrolling enemies. Plus, when they did send in reinforcements, they at least gave you a turn of warning. They threw down a flare first. The flyover spawns don't have any warning, and mostly feels like the game is upping the difficulty by throwing waves and waves of goobers at you. But what's more, this is undermining a key unique aspect of the franchise. You have E-holes already, and they even give a warning before they open up. I really don't see why the flyover batches were necessary, especially since they comprise the vast majority of the reinforcements. It should be noted, though, that even when the enemies are in static positions, you'll rarely, if ever, get the drop on them. The fog of war is incredibly strict, and once you have visual on them, they have a visual on you. Why even make the players move around the map, then? Just pull a Mario Rabbids and place you into the arena. Sheesh, even the real Gears of War games let you get the drop on enemies sometimes. I could also see somebody making the argument that the flyover spawns are necessary since the E-holes can be closed with a frag grenade. If that's the case, maybe give reason to not have frags all the time. The healing grenades aren't especially helpful. Even when I had them equipped and used them often, it didn't feel like it ever did enough. I even saw some advice online for players trying on Insane Mode that advised against them. Because you have to not get hit to make it through, frags are far more advantageous than healing anyway, so really, the stims are basically a wasted concept. You can heal slightly with it, whereas a frag interrupts Overwatch, can close E-holes, and can insta-kill wretches and tickers with a single throw, without the worry of missing a shot. Out of the frag and stim grenade, the choice is obvious, and it's a bit pathetic, honestly. In Mutant Year Zero, they made glow sticks and Molotovs helpful due to the increase in accuracy modifier. In XCOM, there was a shitload of other equipment options you can have instead. Nope, because Gears Tactics doesn't even try in that regard. Frags are the main course. And since they can take out E-holes, I'd imagine that's one of the reasons the flyover reinforcements are so prevalent. What a mess. Given how much I was able to take advantage of the smoke grenade skill that Jack has, why on earth wouldn't they put smoke grenades in? They're so helpful, and they're a staple of the early Gears of War games. Why weren't they included?
That's it, Jack!
Another baffling omission is manual saving. You can save and quit during a level, but if you want to revert to a previous turn during the mission itself, all you get are developer-placed checkpoints. Most seem to agree that manual saving should be a thing in Gears Tactics, but you'll get a few odd ducklings out there saying this prevents save scumming, which is ridiculous. For those of you not familiar, save scumming is when you revert back to a very recent save to do something different this time. Usually it's to take advantage of knowledge you wouldn't have had at the prior save so you won't make the same mistake, or to do the same thing and hope for a better outcome. Personally, I try to avoid save scumming when I can, but like I pointed out in my recent Blood West video, the idea of an undo option speaks to me. Everyone makes frivolous, minuscule mistakes now and then, and being able to go, oh whoops, should be allowed more often.
Oops.
For instance, I accidentally held control on my second mouse click or something in the final boss level, and that caused my character to bounce over cover twice for no reason, which wasted up an action point in the process. That's obviously a slip-up that most people would want to take back, but if I revert to a checkpoint, that could be 10 to 15 minutes of progress potentially lost. While that one is a rather innocent example, I'll be perfectly honest, with Gears Tactics, I definitely would have tried to save scum, but that's only because the likelihood of hitting your shots in this game are as dumb, if not dumber, than an XCOM. It frankly shouldn't be possible to miss a 70% chance to hit 3 times in a row. That's a 2% likelihood. 2%! But oh, when I try for the achievement to hit a shot on 10% chance, 21 attempts. It only stopped there because my partial hits kept whittling him down. Good lord. Before I get a "Dork, I don't think you know how random chance works" comment, yeah, I get it, but listen, this sucks and it isn't how it should be. Either use the Mutant Year Zero's 0, 25, 50, 75, and 100% chance system, which, in retrospect, looks better and better the more tactics games I play that don't feature it, or do some behind-the-scenes work, so missing on a high percent chance ups the next shot of a similar likelihood a bit. I used 3 actions. 3? Because 70% chance to hit is supposed to mean you'll more than likely hit, and because of the checkpoint system, I can't quickly go back and try something else instead. See, I'm not even trying to game the dice rolls. I just don't think it's fair for the game to literally sap you of 3 actions due to the most absurd likelihood imaginable, and because of that nonsense, the enemy stayed alive and damaged us on his turn. This is a ridiculous swing in the enemy's favor, and for what? A mistake? 70%? A mistake? Missing multiple high percentage shots in a row always feels awful, and it doesn't even get balanced out by good luck in the opposite direction. Crits aren't an instant kill or anything, and hair triggers can sometimes be helpful, but barely ever is it something I'm actively hoping for and counting on. Players obviously aren't going to put themselves into a position where taking a 20% chance shot is deemed necessary, so the times where the game could surprise you with the low chance in your favor are exceedingly slim. With that being the case, you're almost never benefited from surprisingly good luck, only punished by somehow fairly common bad luck. I thought the partial hits would be a workaround, but no, I literally have no idea what triggers a partial hit or a miss. Sometimes you just miss, really, really badly, and other times you partially hit. That time I showed you where I fired off 21 10% shots and partially hit a few times, like, does that mean I was within the 10% chance window, or just barely outside it, like I rolled one number off? No idea. This hyper-strict and punishing percentage chance to miss shots doesn't even work for what this game is providing. The whole point of it in XCOM, especially if you went at it in Iron Man mode, was to shape your playthrough and provide long-term consequences. If you risked a shot, missed, and lost a unit, You might have lost one of your best soldiers. Now you'll have to get a fresh rookie, which affects your chances of winning the war. Here, though, well, you have to keep the important people alive, otherwise you get sent back to a checkpoint. One is an immediate and time-consuming consequence, and the other is an insidious but quick one. Even with how daunting an Iron Man run can be in XCOM, though, that isn't their only save setting or difficulty. Hardcore players can go the hardest route and earn it, and others can go at it a bit more relaxed. I just don't see what's gained with the lack of manual saves. The only thing it managed to do for me was waste my time, and I mean that sincerely, as, bafflingly, the game doesn't tell you how long ago the most recent checkpoint was, so if you know you're screwed and opt to return to the last checkpoint, better hope it wasn't too far back, I guess. It's so fucking easy to put some text that says the last time the game saved. Just put a blurb like, last save 22 minutes ago, or the actual date and time of the checkpoint. It's not a difficult concept. If that wasn't enough, a checkpoint could also screw you over. Here, the legendary attachment was locked behind having 3 consecutive turns of holding both control points. Sure, but I notice on the 3rd turn, there's no way for me to maintain this ring over here. I decided not to load a checkpoint yet to see if I could still get the 3 consecutive afterwards. I then realize I can't, but whoopsie, I just got a new checkpoint. Can't revert back to the old one anymore. Now I either restart the whole mission, a fucking side mission, or I don't have a chance at the legendary attachment. I'm sure you can guess which choice I went with. Speaking of the control game mode, the visual on the rings doesn't seem to be accurate. This enemy is clearly not in the ring, obviously. But no, even though I planned it perfectly, this one not counting meant the Locust met me halfway on the scoreboard the next turn, and we're deadlocked. Awesome. On that note, the game doesn't always tell you if you'll be damaged by certain actions, so this time, where I thought I'd be out of the radius for the ticker explosion, nope, I get damaged because this game sucks. I was even behind cover, why would this damage me? The same exact thing happened later on in the game, where I preview my shot against this ticker. It doesn't appear that I'll get hurt, and the ring isn't on me, but when I shoot, I get damaged. In both of these cases, the game should have obviously shown me that these actions would harm my soldiers by flashing their potential hit point loss. It's a very simple ask. I assume because the game didn't account for me having to peer around cover to shoot the ticker, it didn't realize I'd be in the radius, which is embarrassing. The same peer around cover thing goes for when you're in the red cone of an enemy's Overwatch, and there the game does tell you you'll get shot at if you enter Overwatch yourself. Why the inconsistency? The cloaking mechanic seems busted too, or at the very least, it should be made a lot clearer when actions will make you visible again. When you're in the sights of an enemy's Overwatch, like I said before, the actions that'll get you attacked are appropriately labeled. That's great. The same thing should have been done for popping you out of invisibility. For instance, why does using redeploy, which grants my character extra actions, turn me visible again? It's already dumb that I can't go into Overwatch while cloaked, since I'm not doing anything physically different than sliding into cover, and you also can't grab weapons while cloaked either, but seriously, I can't gain more actions? If only there was a recent save I could revert to, so I can completely avoid wasting my camouflage, damn. Speaking of camouflage, one time I cloaked my teammates so I could bypass an enemy's Overwatch. I used the chainsaw action, and the game just completely shat its pants. It knew I should have been able to get through the Overwatch unharmed, since I was moving through it while previously invisible, but it turned me visible the moment I selected the action, so I just walked through the Overwatch. In the end, it worked out, I guess, but my goodness. Continuing on with the minor gripes I have, traveling from point A to B in these types of games is always my least favorite part about them, and you'll have to do it regularly in Gears Tactics. At least in XCOM 2, you could throw down where you wanted to evac. Instead, here, the end of mission circle is always placed at the edge of the map, where you just came from 20 minutes ago, and you'll need to get over there as enemies, may or may not, keep spawning in. It shouldn't be advantageous to let a downed enemy stay alive to prevent more reinforcements, so you can skirt your units along a boring setting to an enlarged hula hoop. Maybe this is one of the reasons I'm drawn to Midnight Suns and Mutant Year Zero, as neither force you to play turn-based walking simulator when the enemies are all defeated. Funny enough, the sabotage side missions don't have it, but that doesn't feel good either, since it just jumps from the last enemy defeated into a cutscene of the tank being destroyed, then a shot of you leaving. I would have liked to place the bomb or something, dang. Even though the sabotage side missions are a copy-paste of a story mission of the same objective, hilariously, this is an example of the developers expediting the process a bit. You had to extract after the story sabotage, but not the side sabotage. Interesting. Sometimes the cover doesn't seem to work properly, and blocks your shot for no reason. Oh, I can't fire at this guy, or overwatch in his direction, even though he's right there? Sure, that makes sense. One time I couldn't climb a ladder, even though I could use it later, and enemies had been using it already, so the only way to get up to the higher elevation was going the long way through tickers. Guess I'll hunker him down right here. And a ticker killed him the next turn. Nice. One time I clearly had an enemy in my sights, but when the camera panned over to him after I chose to shoot, he disappeared, my unit didn't fire, and the game deducted an action point from me. I was sort of in disbelief, so I just kept trying, and sure enough, it kept happening. I spent an entire turn's worth of action points to not shoot a guy. Nice game you have there, splash damage. Once I tried to kick a ticker into a good spot, but it hit an invisible wall. I tried again, and the same thing happened. That's 2 turns I used up to kick this ticker in a place I didn't plan for, and now I can't even shoot the thing or it'll damage me because it's closer than it should be. Guess I'll retreat back to my cover. Literally a completely wasted turn. Awesome. Sometimes Overwatch doesn't work like you'd expect it to, which basically means any and all strategic forethought can be thrown out the window at a moment's notice. I know it's quick, but that's due to the silly camera and chaotic speed of the enemy turns. I have an Overwatch going out in front of my heavy, and a wretch slides on in and walks right by it. You can make the argument the wretch did in fact go where my cone wasn't, but this is ridiculous. For all intents and purposes, my goal was to protect my unit from the front. There was only one place for the wretch to go, and he managed to duck under my mulcher and hit me? What are we doing here? Or how about this one? A wretch pops out of an E-hole, then just ignores my Overwatch. What more am I supposed to do? This one, my sniper didn't shoot at the Theron guard, even though the half cover that's supposedly blocking him shouldn't matter at all. A sniper standing up can't shoot a locust standing up because a knee-high pile of sandbags is in the way? A seemingly inconsequential chest-high wall hasn't had this much power since Dark Souls 2. This next one is the most damning of all. Watch here. Sid's Overwatch is triggered, Sid hits the enemy twice, but Gabe's? No idea. His Overwatch isn't triggered, and the wretch strolls on by and attacks me. If you think I'm going too far with these examples, it's to drive a certain point home. Without manual saves and frequent checkpoints to load from, you're forced to stick with whatever bullshit happens, be it bugs or oversights, undermining the actions you've chosen. Having the trust that things will work is kind of integral when it comes to strategy games, as it's not in real time, you don't have infinite actions. On the topic of the out-of-game nonsense, one of the pop-ups that looks to be an upgrade is the roster size. I remember seeing the first roster size increase and getting a little excited, since in XCOM you could up your squad capacity so you could bring more in with you each mission. Going from 4 units at a time to 6 is a significant upgrade. Nope, that's not what this is. Roster size just means how many cogs you have to select from at a time. Again, this makes no sense with the current progression system of the game. Having a ton of soldiers dilutes the kill XP funneling you'll need to do to progress the main characters, and you'll be replacing the underleveled guys with newer, higher-leveled recruits anyway. Having a big roster size is pointless and, after a while, insulting. Fuck off, don't tell me this like it's some type of gain, I don't give a shit. Recruiting soldiers is incredibly boring, doesn't connect to anything meaningful, and because some of them later on can be better and come with higher-tiered skills than the ones you had before, why even care about leveling up your early rookies? There are missions where you save a couple from torture pods, and those ones do show up on the recruit list, but the other randos there are just, well, random. Pick 'em, then fire your low-leveled doofuses and move on. If rescuing gears was the only way to add them to your roster, and of course if those were optional side missions and not mandatory ones, I could see some semblance of an interesting idea here. How it is currently, all fluff and no substance. One of my main complaints about Mutant Year Zero is the juggling act when it comes to equipment. Swap that for this, strip everything of one character so you can soup up another. Well, here it's even more tedious, since everything looks the same on the menu screen. There's a lot more equipment overall, naturally all with extremely minute changes depending on the rarity and attachment type. You can't get rid of anything, it's always there clogging everything up, And worst of all, you'll constantly be shuffling out your soldiers with better, newer recruits. This is basically the only thing you can do when you're not in a mission. This is the only change of pace the game offers, and for me, it's the most boring thing imaginable. So much so that after a while, I stopped caring about collecting crates and missions or seeing what the newest attachment did. See all those red triangles? That's me neglecting to go through all of the attachments to fine-tune which ones go better with what unit. No thanks. I only ever checked legendary mods after a certain point. The constant rigmarole of keeping up with all of the new loot box attachments is tiring beyond belief, and some characters being inaccessible at times just adds to the mess. Oh, I can't interact with this unit's gear because they're traveling? Oh, I get it, because they were just in the last side mission I did. Yeah, that logic makes sense. Even though we use the same minivan for all of the missions, and Jack takes part in every single one, I just want to equip my scout with the new armor I unlocked before I forget, please! This might be an attempt at grounding this game world a bit, but it comes across as an annoying hassle more than anything else. The same thing can be said for some squad mates being banned from taking part in some missions, both side and main ones. Maybe this was them trying to incentivize you to give other cogs a shot, but it more so left me confused and exhausted. Exhausting is a good word to encapsulate my Gears Tactics experience overall. I don't normally feel the need to show my files, but just take a look at this slog. At the end of May, I started the game bright-eyed and bushy-tailed, and by the middle of July, I finally crossed the godforsaken finish line. If you're observant, you can even spot the two places I would have normally stopped playing the game. Looks like right after Act 1 ended, I was getting a bit fatigued. Then, dear God, after the Corpser boss, it was a sad and desperate struggle. Do I talk about the story? Should I? It seems like other people give so much weight to story in games, whereas I just can't be bothered, especially for something like this. It was incredibly bizarre and kind of sad to read one of the interviews with Splash Damage, where the interviewer said, and I quote, "Gears Tactics features industry-leading cutscenes interjected seamlessly between the top-down isometric gameplay. How did the team accomplish this?"
Mr. Burns, your campaign seems to have the momentum of a runaway freight train. Why are you so popular?
Ooh, a tough question, but a fair one.
The answer is probably interesting for some people, but I can't possibly take this seriously. Gears Tactics is an example of good cutscenes? Seamlessly interjecting? What does this mean? XCOM has some admittedly cringy and awkward as hell cutscenes, but those feel just as seamless as Gears Tactics. Is it because Gears Tactics has better graphics? Is it that it's all in-engine? Is it because a cutscene triggers after a mission is done? Is that not how games have worked since Ninja Gaiden on the NES? Hell, Ninja Gaiden on the Xbox has the same thing. Well, those are FMVs, but regardless, you get it. It's a silly thing to pat yourself on the back for, especially considering how utterly boring the story is. Let's go through it together, huh? Prequel to Gears of War, Prescott orders Hammer of Dawn strikes, main character Gabe is an ex-high-ranking COG soldier who did a bad thing once. Funny how much that backstory gets played out, huh? And he gets assigned a mission. Take out Ukon, a Locust general, and take this guy, Sid Redborn, with. Recruit Gears. Hey Michaela, you know where Ukon is? Oh, you do? Sick, let's go there. Oh snap, he can't be killed. Prescott doesn't care, just get the job done. We figure out Ukon is going after certain pharmaceutical canisters, so we bait him into a trap. We got him. But wait, Sid betrays us, he says he wants to leave with Ukon, but Ukon escapes, big corpser fight, then the best scene of the game happens. Prescott says to kill Sid and keep going for Ukon. Sid still doesn't want to talk, but he does anyway, and it's revealed that the COG army was what created the Locust. They were researching a cure for rust lung, which is what Ukon has, and they made these abominations instead. They pitched their military use to the COG, but something, now the Locust are the bad guys. We confirm Sid was telling the truth, and Gabe lets Prescott on to the fact that he knows something about New Hope. Gabe sends their coordinates, and Prescott sends a squad to arrest Sid. Gabe says they'll be long gone by the time they arrive, and... well, Prescott didn't send anyone, he ordered a Hammer of Dawn strike. This is so sad. A fight with an opposing COG squad sounds like it could have been a fun detour for a mission or two. Nope, instead Prescott went to kill them instantly, and he just doesn't move the hammer at all? He zaps that exact coordinate and stops. Wow, how ridiculously stupid is Prescott, seriously. Now that Gabe claims Prescott thinks they're dead, Sid says he knows a way to stop Ukon's healing, so we spend several main missions getting everything together, which involves us doing standard regular missions, but maybe throw in an animation where we grab something from a chest. Sure, that feels satisfying. We're really prepping for Ukon now, boys! The next scene, though, was quite the surprise. I can't show it, obviously, but it was a sex scene between Michaela and Sid. This was very unexpected, but... No, I'm just kidding, that didn't happen. Would have been funny, though. No, instead, something that's both kind of cool, but kind of stupid. First of all, this interaction is weird.
Careful. Stare at that any harder, you'll set it on fire.
Don't bother. Hasn't moved in 2 hours.
2 hours? He's been immobile for 2 hours? Uh-huh. However, this discovery of the places Ukon hasn't been is pretty engaging. It actually got me excited to see where this would lead to. And then, in the very next mission, we rescue 2 random people, one of which happens to be Reyna, someone we've never heard of, and now we want to talk with her for some reason. She apparently has insider info on Ukon and wants to kill him. Oh, kind of undercuts, you know, that scene that was actually interesting. Sure, why not? This incredibly boring backstory backpack is totally worth the time spent with her. Yeah, awesome. Funny enough, because I stopped playing the series after Gears of War 3, I'm only just now, as I'm writing this, realizing how important Reyna actually is. Oh, she's the mother of Kate, the main character of Gears of War 4 and 5. Oh, so basically this is just fan service, got it. I know this is a prequel story, but really, they had to feature the parents of the new face of the franchise too? Anyway, yay, Reyna knows where Ukon is, thanks Reyna. Okay, now what's next? 3 side missions, you say? Oh joy. The next story mission is us scoping out the lab we were told about, and we clear our way to a vantage point. At least we get a cutscene, but it's just us scoping out the place and leaving. Again, this is what we're earning, remember. There's practically no out-of-game anything or something to look forward to. This is the prize, and it's just a load of nothing. Now what, you ask? Gotta get more armor for our vehicle. You know, the one we see sometimes in cutscenes. After we do the side mission adjacent story mission, guess what it's time for? Another batch of 3 side missions. At the time, my girlfriend was watching me play, and I bet her there would be another set of side missions, and of course there was. Anyway, Gabe does a big speech to all the procedurally generated nobodies, and the plan is, they hold down the fort in the front, and the important people go in and take out Ukon. Okay. After the fight, Ukon claims his monsters will outlive the humans, and Reyna shoots him in the face. Except it's obviously a snub pistol she's holding, but the game makes it sound like a Boltok or something. Super weird. Speaking of Reyna, she looks so bad, almost out of place. Her hair, her face, it's like she was created for a PS3 game or something. So odd. Now that Ukon is dead, Gabe says to let Prescott keep his world, but we gotta rebuild and continue taking out Ukon's monsters. The end. Apparently Gabe and Reyna fuck off screen, I guess, I don't know. It seems like the crux of the story was the Locust creation reveal, and that was fine, I guess, but if they were going to spend this much time on cutscenes anyway, at least show us some flashback scenes with Sid and Ukon back in the day. It's like the game wants to take itself seriously, but at the same time, doesn't want to try too hard. Prescott is a dumbass for completely buzzing off after that one Hammer of Dawn strike. Sid deciding to betray his team and take Ukon makes a little bit of sense, given that Ukon is the only sentient and normal Locust, therefore he wants him alive. But then Sid says he just wanted to parade him around to make the military look bad. Weak. Michaela hits Sid in the face with a shovel, and that's great. But besides that, who cares?
Fascist. Fascists. A fascist celebrate.
Reyna is a complete afterthought in all of this, and knowing how integral she is to events 30 years down the line, it's downright ridiculous how they threw her in here to bait Gears fans. Nothing is said or done with her that's interesting, she just mentions this pendant was her mom's or something. Cool. Is that significant? Probably, but I don't know. After the story, you can keep playing the game? That's right, you can take on more side missions and unlock supreme loot. Hell yeah, that's a great reason to slow the experience gain so much, so that to get to level 10, you'll need to keep playing after the credits. That makes sense. What the fuck? Gears Tactics is a supremely disappointing game, but I still kinda like it. I have a problem. I love seeing different IPs in the tactics genre. Maybe I should give the Lord of the Rings and EDF tactics games a shot, huh? It's conflicting, since I want more companies to make their own Gears Tactics, but as a video game, I can only say it's below average. It truly boggles the mind that this game received 0 negative reviews and only 11 mixed when looking at Metacritic. An 80 average score? Really? I normally don't care much about what other reviewers think, but were they paying attention to what they were playing? I've seen articles praise this as one of the best in the genre. Huh? I have no idea how someone could see the enemy turn shenanigans, or the repeat side missions, or the level up system and think this is a standout title that is worth anything more than an average score. For all my talks of Mutant Year Zero earlier, what dawned on me as I was writing was the missed opportunity this game had. If this, Gears Tactics, was more like Mutant Year Zero, a mix between adventure, tactics, and stealth, that would have done a serviceable job of pulling Tactics fans into the series, got Gears fans to dabble in tactics, and the pacing would have been so much better. The out-of-game recruit soldier stuff sucks dick anyway, so just make the 4 main characters be the ones you have as a group, and let them and the players have a genuine Gears of War adventure, but with tactics instead of third-person shooting. That would have been so much better than this. What a pity. Thanks for watching, everyone. I hated making this video, since it just kept spiraling and getting out of control. I hated playing the game for the last 15 hours or so, and I began seeing play sessions more like a job I had to clock in and out of, instead of me enjoying the game. All that said, I hope the video was worth it. A hit piece on Gears Tactics is just what the doctor ordered, and I'm happy to move on to brighter pastures. Thanks to my patrons who give me money and get to vote on the games I cover sometimes. Yep, they chose this one, so I had to do it. If you want to partake in a vote, or just earn a spot in the credits, you can sign up to the Patreon too. God, I'm sure YouTube viewers aren't sick of hearing about Patreon, am I right? I would like for you to subscribe though, that would be very helpful for me, please. Thank you. Okay, that's it for me this time. Have a good one. I'll see you next time.
Fascist.